Do you know what's funny? When I was on dating apps, I didn't get much attention.
Really?
No, I didn't. And I've got a very good looking best friend and he got all of the attention. So bear in mind, I was 18, shoplifting food to feed myself. I was scrawny as hell.
Okay.
I was,
Did you put all that on the
I didn't put that in
profile?
my bio, but I tried to put my best selfie on there
That's
and
amazing.
I just couldn't get any like decent leads. And my best friend, who's like blonde and beautiful and he's got the perfect hair and he looks like something out of like a magazine, I would sit with him and he would just get the pick of the litter. So my whole strategy was I would just do much better in person when I met people.
Yeah.
But obviously it's much more difficult to meet people. If you look at the stats around how people meet, it's crazy. It's like a vertical line upwards. When you look at the line that's showing people meeting online, just out of nowhere. And school's gone down and church has gone down and through a friend has gone down and it's pretty much all online. So if you're not, I think, aesthetically beautiful in the typical sense of the word, and have signals of wealth and status, you really are going to struggle. And I actually came to learn this a lot, not just from my own experience on dating apps once upon a time, but also from doing this podcast. And I remember the first time we had on a founder of a dating app and put the episode out assuming everyone would love it. And just the anger in the comment section from pretty much all men who feel like dating apps have ruined their lives or are just an evil thing in the world. And it really caught me off guard. In fact, reading those comments on that particular episode was when I go, oh my God, people hate dating apps. There's like this group of people that just think it's like the cause of all pain.
This is really difficult stuff to talk about, I think, because it's so visceral, it's primal. Like we're talking about sex. We're talking about procreation. We're talking about our DNA being passed on and who with. And so it's not for nothing if something's happening in that market. And it's not for nothing we see a huge rise in the share of childless men, like especially getting to 40 and of women, but even more so for men. And more men saying that having children is important to them. More men starting to say actually forming a family is kind of important to them. And so there's a weird paradox here, which is that, the old idea of like marriage and kids is that like women have to kind of trap men into it, right? As men, we just want to go our own way, right? We want to be cowboys around the desert or the forest or something, but the ball and chain, the woman, she traps you, right? And she domesticates you and you kind of go along with it because you want to have kids, right? But in your heart, you're still out there on the frontier, right? And she's the one at the hearth. That is complete bullshit on every single level. Actually, historically, back to where we were before, being masculine meant being in the tribe. It meant generating more than you need for yourself. I love this idea of a surplus that comes from this guy, David Gilmour, that mature men generate more of whatever it is than they need. They're surplus generators. So rather than being surplus to requirements, which is what I think a lot of men feel, they actually generate a surplus for others to use. And so the idea of like, you've heard this men going their own way movement. It's like a male separatist thing online. We're going to go our own way. We don't need, turning away from women is the opposite of masculinity, right? Masculinity defined as like a lone ranger or I'm my own man is the least masculine sentence I think you could ever utter. I'm just my own man. I do my own thing, right? If you're not a man for others, then in my view, you're not a man. And so it's quite interesting to kind of think about how the current world of like dating and families and so on, if it does leave many men feeling like they're not going to have those connections, they're not going to have a sense of being for others, and not providing just in the economic sense, but being needed, then it does leave a lot of them benched, and they either go their own way or they get mad as hell. So you see the rise of the incel movement, etc. And so again, you're just seeing the extreme examples are the ones that get the headlines. But behind the kind of men who are acting out, there's a lot more men who are checking out. They're just saying, I think I'm done with this. And that's very dangerous.
You mentioned an elderly man who's now alone, maybe lost his partner, maybe, what do they call it? Widowed? No. Widower? What's the male?
I think widowed is both, isn't it?
Oh, is it? Okay.
I think so.
So a widowed man. But as we think about younger men, and the environment in which the sort of dating love environment that they're in, what's changed there? Because one of the ways that we can feel needed is if at 18 years old we find a partner and that she makes me feel needed. In my life, my girlfriend is one of the people that makes me feel most needed and most important. She's constantly asking when I'm coming back from Dragon's Den filming or when I'm going to be here, and she's, you know, she makes me feel like I'm service to her in the same way that she's service to me. So, but that landscape seems to have changed as well. The dating environment, the romantic environment.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I'm just reflecting on my own personal experience too, just through the lives of my sons. And one of my sons has just spent ages helping his girlfriend buy her first car. And he's really into cars and all that stuff. And he's into finance with the loans. And he's just basically done the work for her around it, because she's working full time and he's got a bit of time. And so that is a really good example. He said to me the other day, I said, God, you put a load of time into, like, test driven like 20 cars and all of this stuff, loads of this for your girlfriend. He's like, well, right now I don't have that much of my own stuff to do. So it's really nice to be able to do stuff for her. And so you're right. I think those relationships, they can be in like traditional families, but also, of course, friends, but particularly romantic relationships, they can do that for you. So it's not for nothing that we're dating less, dating later. You're seeing a massive rise in the share of young men who are single by comparison, both to young women and in the past. And so that's another change, which you could argue is good or bad, right? Is it good or bad that we're dating later and having sex later and taking longer to get married and so on? Again, I think you can argue for sure there's lots of good stuff there. But one consequence of that is to leave a lot more men going a lot longer before those romantic relationships were also pulling on them, calling on them to say, I need you to do this. I need you to drive me to work. Can you pick me up from this? Can you do this, right? And that used to happen much, much earlier than it's happening now. And so there's now perfectly possibly 25, 26, 27 years of age, and your parents don't need you, because then, you know, maybe you've left home, so they don't need you. Maybe you don't have a girlfriend, so you don't have a girlfriend that needs you. Maybe you're not working, or you're working in a place that you don't really feel like it matters if you're there or not. It's like, so it's perfectly possible in a way that wasn't possible until recently to get to your mid and late 20s as a man and honestly feel like it's not quite clear who needs you.
It's interesting because also when you layer on top of that the dating app environment, I had a lot of people come on the podcast that talk about, I mean, I've had a couple of the founders of the big dating apps, but I've also had...
Have you had the Tinder founder on?
No.
Okay.
I've had people that have left Tinder and started their own apps like Bumble.
Okay.
But one of the things that I've come to learn is that the bottom sort of 50% of men are basically getting not much action at all.
Almost none, yeah.
Almost none. And then the like top 10% of men are getting all the action, because the way that these dating apps are set up is to really reward that sort of most affluent, most attractive top 10% of men that are most desirable. But I imagine if you'd gone back 100 years, it was really like, who's in your village versus, you know.
Yeah.
Versus an algorithm sorting millions of people.
But it's so interesting, that pattern that you describe of like the bottom 50% of men basically not getting much action, if any, and the top 10% like getting almost all of it. Because an evolutionary psychologist that I know looked at that data and said, that looks like human history to me. So if we go back further, actually 95% of known human societies were polygamous. All right, monogamy is very weird and very recent. And here's one that always blows my mind, even though I've said it so many times now, is that we have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. We have twice as many women in our ancestral past as men.
Why is that? How does that make sense?
Because, and the reason it's so hard for a modern brain to get a head around that is because you're thinking, well, you need a man and a woman to have a kid, right? So you'd have to have equal numbers.
Yeah.
But you're thinking about monogamy. Across human history, men have only had about a 50% chance of reproducing. So back in each generation, half the male lines just literally die out. Like 50% of the men just don't have kids. So boom, they're gone. And almost all women have reproduced, right? So if you've got almost all women reproducing and 50% of men, then mathematically you're going to end up twice as many female ancestors, because you don't need that many men to have babies. And so historically what's happened is the top status men with the gold and the rich, whatever, they've had multiple wives, or certainly concubines or multiple partners. And there's like famous examples like Genghis Khan is the ancestor to whoever. But in Ireland, something like more than 1 in 5 Irish people are descended from King whatever it is.
Well, I was told my grandfather in Nigeria has, I'm going to say 10 wives.
Okay.
I'm told that I have 40 odd uncles and aunties in Nigeria. Not intending to go back anytime soon, just in case there's a lot of conversations.
You're not tempted by that model?
I'm not. No. I am actually going to Nigeria soon, but it's a headache to think about navigating that many uncles and aunties.
but isn't it interesting how actually by going online and sort of taking away the sort of cultural norm around kind of monogamy, in a way, what it's exposed is kind of this ancient pattern, which is women are much pickier than men around partner selection, right? And so women are sort of, ideally I'll go for him, and women are just going, no, I don't know which way it is. That's right. Which way?
It's right, yeah.
So the women are going, no.
Swipe.
Oh, he's incredibly handsome and incredibly rich and right, maybe, whatever, like maybe. Whereas the men are like, yeah, sure. She looks nice. Maybe not. Yeah. So you get this incredible asymmetry between the two. But in some ways, it's like I'm making light of it. But actually, could you find a kind of more telling sign of the fact that so many men are just kind of feeling like, well, maybe a bit useless, not very attractive, not very needed, not very just, right? The old rules about how to kind of navigate the romantic space, the old rules about how to be a man, the old rules about how to succeed, a lot of those have just been turned upside down, creating this huge vacuum, which is being filled by all kinds of bad stuff, but also just this massive sense of disorientation. It's like a kaleidoscope. You shake it, right, but it's still moving. We don't know what the new patterns look like yet. And so I genuinely kind of feel like when I talk to a lot of young men and see them, like that is the sense they've got. They're just like, whoa, like the disorientation that they're feeling as we've kind of shifted these equilibriums. In some ways, the online dating apps are just magnifying that. But that's not a great feeling, is it? To kind of go on a dating app and not get any interest at all.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.